There's a magic in old movie theaters, a ghost in the machine that flickers in the projector's beam. They are palaces of shared dreams, where history is written in silver nitrate and forgotten secrets are stored in the dark. But what happens when the final credits roll and the owner is found dead in his seat? What if the murder weapon wasn't a knife or a gun, but a story? A forbidden film, hidden away for decades, that held a truth so dangerous, it was worth killing to keep it buried. Before we dim the lights and the feature presentation begins, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the final, shocking scene of this investigation. Now, the projector is warming up. Let's roll the film. The Grand Regent Theater was not just a cinema. It was a time capsule. Built in the golden age of the 1930s, it was a magnificent Art Deco palace, a cathedral of escapism that had somehow survived the relentless march of multiplexes and streaming services. Its grand, sweeping lobby still boasted polished terrazzo floors, ornate brass railings, and a magnificent crystal chandelier that cast a warm, honeyed glow over everything. It was a place that smelled of hot buttered popcorn, aging velvet, and the faint, sweet scent of a century's worth of collective dreams. The theater's owner and sole proprietor was a man named Arthur Vance. At 72, Arthur was as much a relic as the theater he so lovingly maintained. He was a cantankerous, passionate cinephile who lived in a small apartment above the lobby and knew every inch of the building, from the plush seats of the main auditorium to the dusty, forgotten corners of its labyrinthine basement. He was a man who believed in the magic of the shared cinematic experience, and he had dedicated his life to preserving it. On this particular crisp autumn night, the Grand Regent was hosting a special event, the premiere of a restored print of the classic 1950s noir thriller, City of Whispers. It was a passion project for Arthur, who had spent years hunting down the original film elements. The event was a success. The city's film lovers, a mix of old-timers and young, nostalgic hipsters, had filled the 800-seat auditorium, their faces upturned and illuminated by the flickering black and white images on the giant screen. After the final credits rolled and the last of the patrons had drifted out into the cool night air, Arthur began his nightly ritual. He locked the heavy front doors, turned off the marquee lights, and walked through his empty, silent kingdom, picking up stray popcorn boxes and lost programs. His young projectionist, a film student named Leo, had already rewound the massive film reels and left for the night. Arthur was alone, as he often was, with the ghosts of his theater. The next morning, the Grand Regent did not open at its usual time. The local merchants in the bustling downtown district noted its dark, silent facade with concern. By noon, the police were called. 2 patrol officers found a side door unlocked and entered the theater. They found Arthur Vance in the front row of the main auditorium, his favorite seat. He was slumped to one side, his head resting against the plush velvet. A half-eaten bag of his beloved popcorn was on the floor beside him. He looked, for all the world, as if he had simply fallen asleep after his own successful premiere. But his skin was cold, his eyes were open in a fixed, vacant stare, and a thin line of dried blood trickled from his left ear, a single, stark note of violence in the peaceful, silent scene. Detective Miles Corrigan and his partner, Detective Lena Petrova, arrived to a scene that felt both tragic and deeply unsettling. Corrigan was a homicide detective of the old school, a man who believed that murder was a simple, ugly business no matter how elegant the setting. The grandeur of the old theater was, to him, just a fancy backdrop for the same old story of human darkness. Petrova, however, felt the weight of the place. She was younger, a keen observer who understood that environments held echoes, that a place like this had a story to tell. The medical examiner was perplexed. "The cause of death is a massive cerebral hemorrhage," she explained, shining a penlight into Arthur's unseeing eye. "But it appears to have been caused by a sonic trauma. A sudden, incredibly high-frequency sound wave, targeted and localized. It literally vibrated the blood vessels in his brain until one of them burst. There's no external wound, apart from the bleeding from the ear canal. It's a bizarre, almost sci-fi method of murder. Clean, silent to anyone outside the immediate vicinity, and incredibly sophisticated. A sound weapon? Corrigan grunted, incredulous. In an old movie theater? It seems that way, the ME confirmed. The killer would have needed a specialized device, and they would have needed to get very close to him. The investigation began. The initial theory was a robbery gone wrong, but nothing was missing. The cash from the premiere was still in the till. Arthur's wallet was in his pocket. This was a targeted killing. They started with the few people who were close to Arthur. There was his estranged daughter, Julia Vance, a high-powered real estate developer who had been trying for years to get her father to sell the valuable downtown property the theater sat on. Their relationship was a long-running battle between her pragmatism and his sentimentality. "My father was a stubborn old fool," she told them, her grief sharp and edged with a familiar frustration. "He was sitting on a gold mine, and he chose to live like a pauper, surrounded by dust and memories. Yes, we fought. I wanted him to sell, to secure his future, my future. But to kill him? My God. I just wanted him to retire, not to die." She had an alibi. She was at a city planning dinner with 24 witnesses. Then there was Benjamin Croft, the owner of the rival cinema, a sterile, modern multiplex at the edge of town. Croft had made several aggressive offers to buy Arthur out, all of which had been contemptuously rejected. The Grand Regent was a thorn in his side, a beloved institution that drew the cinephile crowd he could never capture. Arthur was a dinosaur, Croft said, without a hint of sympathy. He was holding back progress. But murder? That's bad for business. All business. Croft claimed to have been home with his wife, a weak alibi that put him high on their list. Finally, they interviewed Leo, the young projectionist. He was a devoted, almost fanatical, disciple of Arthur's. He was heartbroken by the old man's death. "Arthur was a genius," he said, his eyes red-rimmed. "He taught me everything. He was the last of his kind. He was the soul of this place." Leo had left the theater around 11:30 p.m. after the show. His alibi was that he had gone to a late-night diner with friends, which was later confirmed. The case was a puzzle. A high-tech, exotic murder weapon, and a victim who lived in the past. The suspects had classic, simple motives: greed, professional jealousy that seemed at odds with the sophisticated, almost clinical method of the murder. Frustrated, Petrova decided to explore the environment itself. She felt the answer was somewhere within the theater's walls. She and Corrigan walked through the silent, dusty building, their footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. They went up to the projection booth, a magical, cluttered space filled with the smell of warm electronics and old film stock. It was a museum of cinematic technology, from the massive dual-reel 35mm projector used for the premiere to an even older carbon arc projector from the 1940s that Arthur kept as a display piece. Then they descended into the basement. It was a labyrinth of storage rooms, a vast, subterranean world filled with forgotten movie posters, dusty velvet ropes, and the ghosts of 1,000 forgotten films. Most of the rooms were filled with junk, but one door at the very back of the basement was different. It was made of heavy steel with a modern, high-security keypad lock. It was completely out of place in the old building. "What's in here?" Corrigan asked, looking at the door. "According to Leo, it's Arthur's private archive," Petrova said. "A climate-controlled vault where he kept his most valuable and fragile film prints. No one else had the code. Not even him." This was a new and intriguing secret. The old man, who seemed to live an open, if eccentric, life, had a secret vault. They got a warrant and brought in a police locksmith. It took him 2 hours to bypass the sophisticated lock. When the heavy steel door swung open, it revealed a small, cold, meticulously organized room. It was a film archive. Rows of metal shelves held hundreds of film canisters, each one carefully labeled. Most of them were classics, rare prints of well-known films. But on a single, specially marked shelf at the back of the vault, there was a single, unlabeled canister. It was made of old, slightly rusted metal, and it looked different from the others. It was heavier, and the film gauge seemed unusual. Petrova, wearing archival gloves, carefully opened the canister. Inside, nestled on a bed of old velvet, was a single large reel of 70mm film. The film stock was thick, the perforations a different shape from the standard. It was an unusual format, something she had only read about in film history books. There was no title on the leader, just a series of grease pencil numbers. "What is this?" Corrigan wondered aloud. "I don't know," Petrova replied, a strange feeling of unease settling over her. "But I have a feeling Arthur Vance wasn't killed for his real estate. I think he was killed for a movie." The mystery had a new, silent protagonist. A forbidden film reel, a story that someone had been willing to commit a bizarre and sophisticated murder to keep from ever being seen. The discovery of the secret film vault and its solitary, unlabeled reel of 70mm film transformed the investigation. The mundane motives of real estate greed and business rivalry suddenly seemed flimsy, like the paper-thin plots of B-movies. Detectives Corrigan and Petrova now believed the heart of the mystery lay not in Arthur Vance's present, but in a secret he had kept locked away in his climate-controlled past. The film canister on the evidence table back at the precinct felt less like a clue and more like a silent, coiled witness. The first challenge was to figure out what the film was. The 70mm format was rare, and the film stock itself was old and fragile, likely made of the notoriously unstable and flammable silver nitrate that was common in the early days of cinema. They couldn't just thread it into any old projector. They needed an expert. Petrova found one in Dr. Alastair Finch, a semi-retired professor of film preservation at the city's university. Finch was a man in his late 60s, with the gentle, precise manner of a watchmaker and an encyclopedic knowledge of cinematic history. They brought the canister to his university lab, a place that was part museum, part high-tech workshop. Finch examined the reel with the reverence of a priest handling a holy relic. "Magnificent," he whispered, his gloved fingers gently tracing the edge of the film. "This is a variant of the old Fox Grandeur format. It was an experimental widescreen process from the early 1930s. Produced a stunning image, but it was incredibly expensive and died out almost immediately. Only a handful of films were ever made in it. And this looks like silver nitrate stock. Highly volatile. A projector fire with this stuff would be like a bomb going off. Where did you find this?" "In the victim's private archive," Corrigan said, his patience for the technical details wearing thin. "Can you play it?" "Play it?" Finch looked at him as if he'd suggested juggling with nitroglycerin. "Absolutely not. Not on a standard projector. It would be destroyed, and it could take the building with it. I have a specialized, custom-built digital scanning rig, a flatbed scanner that can capture the film frame by frame without any risk of combustion. It will be slow, but it's the only safe way to see what's on here. While Dr. Finch began the slow, laborious process of digitally scanning the mysterious film, Corrigan and Petrova dug deeper into the life of Arthur Vance, looking for a connection to this forgotten piece of cinema history. They went through his personal effects in the apartment above the theater. It was a cinephile's paradise, every surface covered with books, DVDs, and movie memorabilia. In a locked drawer of his desk, Petrova found a series of old, handwritten letters, dated from the 1970s. They were from a man named David Sterling, who identified himself as the son of a classic Hollywood director named Elias Sterling. Elias Sterling was a name Petrova recognized, a visionary director from the 1930s whose career had been mysteriously cut short after his first and only feature film, a notorious flop called The Elysian Fields, had bankrupted the studio that made it. The director had disappeared from public life and died in obscurity. The letters told a fascinating story. David Sterling had been trying to track down the last surviving print of his father's lost film. He believed the official story that all the prints had been deliberately destroyed by the disgraced studio head was a lie. He believed one print had survived, and he had reason to believe it had ended up in the hands of a young, obsessive film collector named Arthur Vance. The final letter was dated 1978. In it, a young Arthur Vance admitted, in cagey, reluctant terms, that he did indeed possess the film. He promised to keep it safe, but refused to ever screen it, calling it a dangerous and cursed object. The correspondence ended there. "So that's our film," Corrigan said, reading over Petrova's shoulder. "The Elysian Fields, a legendary lost film. Why would Arthur call it cursed?" And more importantly, Petrova added, "Why would someone kill him for it 40 years later?" The motive was beginning to take a strange historical shape. This wasn't about a recent grievance. It was about an old secret, a secret that Arthur had been guarding for most of his adult life. Their investigation into the suspects took on a new light. They now looked at them not just through the lens of their relationship with Arthur, but through a possible connection to this lost film. Julia Vance, the real estate developer daughter, had always claimed to have no interest in her father's dusty old hobby. But a search of her financial records revealed a recent and very large payment to a private investigator who specialized in historical research and asset location. The PI's file, obtained via a warrant, showed that Julia had hired him to find any and all information on a film called The Elysian Fields, and specifically, to determine its potential market value as a lost cultural asset. When they confronted her with this, Julia's cool corporate demeanor cracked. "It wasn't for me," she confessed, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and grief. "It was for him. My father was going to lose the theater. He was drowning in debt. I knew about the film. He'd mentioned it once, years ago, in a moment of drunken sentimentality. I thought if it was as valuable as the legend said, we could sell it to a collector or a museum. We could save the Regent. I was trying to help him, and he was too stubborn to listen." Her story was plausible, but it also placed her at the center of a new motive. If she knew the film was a multimillion-dollar asset, she might have been willing to kill her own father to gain control of it. Their attention then turned back to Benjamin Croft, the multiplex owner. He was a businessman, a pragmatist. A dusty old film wouldn't interest him. Or would it? A deep dive into his family history revealed a startling connection. His grandfather, Samuel Croft, had been the head of the very studio that had produced The Elysian Fields in the 1930s. He was the man who had been financially ruined by the film's failure and who had supposedly ordered all the prints destroyed. This was a bombshell. Benjamin Croft wasn't just a business rival. He was the heir to the film's disgraced legacy. The shame of his grandfather's failure was a well-known, if rarely spoken of, part of his family's history. As these historical connections were coming to light, Dr. Finch called from the university lab. He sounded shaken. "You need to come see this," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I've scanned the first reel. This is not the film everyone thinks it is." Corrigan and Petrova hurried to the lab. Dr. Finch had the scanned images up on a large, high-resolution monitor. The quality was breathtaking. The grandeur format gave the black and white images an incredible depth and clarity. The film was a dark, expressionistic thriller, set in the corrupt, shadowy world of a booming 1930s metropolis. "The film is a masterpiece," Finch said, his voice filled with awe. "Elias Sterling was a genius, but that's not the story. Watch this." He played a scene set in a glamorous, high-society party. The camera panned across a room of wealthy, powerful men in tuxedos, drinking champagne and making deals. Finch paused the image, zooming in on the face of one of the background actors, a handsome, smiling man standing next to the film's protagonist. "Do you recognize him?" Finch asked. Corrigan and Petrova stared. They didn't. Finch then pulled up a historical photograph on another screen. It was of the city's most famous and revered founding father, a man named Thomas Blackwood, a philanthropist and industrialist whose name adorned the city's main library, university, and hospital. The smiling man in the film and the stern, historical figure in the photograph were, without a doubt, the same person. "This is impossible," Petrova breathed. "Blackwood died in 1928, in a tragic yachting accident. This film was made in 1932. "Exactly," Finch said, his eyes wide. "And watch this." He played another scene, this one a clandestine meeting in a smoky backroom. One of the characters, a shadowy political boss, was talking about the men who really ran the city. He referred to a secret society, a cabal of the city's most powerful men who had faked their own deaths to escape public scrutiny, and now pulled the strings from behind the scenes. The film's plot, which had been dismissed by the few critics who saw it in 1932 as fantastical and absurd, was not fiction. "This isn't a movie," Corrigan said, a slow, dawning horror on his face. "This is a documentary." Elias Sterling, the director, had somehow stumbled upon a massive, explosive conspiracy. He hadn't made a fictional film. He had filmed the truth and disguised it as a noir thriller. He had cast the real conspirators, perhaps under false pretenses, as extras in his movie. He had embedded their real-life secrets into his fictional plot. The film wasn't a flop. It was a piece of evidence, a cinematic exposé so dangerous that the powerful men it depicted had been forced to bury it. They had ruined the studio, destroyed the director, and attempted to erase the film from history. And one print had survived, locked in Arthur Vance's basement for 40 years. The murder now made a terrifying kind of sense. The secret society, if it or its descendants still existed, would do anything to keep this film from being seen. They had discovered that Arthur had the last print. They had sent a message, an assassin, to retrieve it and silence him. The high-tech, untraceable sound weapon was not the tool of a spurned daughter or a rival businessman. It was the tool of a powerful, shadowy organization with limitless resources. The case had just become infinitely larger and more dangerous. They were no longer investigating a simple murder. They were on the verge of uncovering a secret that had been buried at the very foundations of their city for almost a century. And the only thing standing between that secret and the light of day was one last, forbidden film reel. The revelation that The Elysian Fields was not a fictional flop, but a disguised documentary of a century-old conspiracy sent a shockwave through the investigation. Detectives Corrigan and Petrova found themselves in a story far grander and more dangerous than they could have imagined. They were no longer just homicide detectives. They were custodians of a secret that had the power to rewrite the city's history. The single, rusty film canister was now the most important and most dangerous piece of evidence they had ever handled. Their first priority was to secure the film. Dr. Finch, now fully aware of the explosive nature of his work, agreed to continue the scanning process under a clandestine police guard at his university lab. Corrigan, meanwhile, pulled every string he had to get a warrant to exhume the body of Thomas Blackwood, the city's founding father who had supposedly died in 1928 but had appeared very much alive in the 1932 film. It was a long shot, a request that was met with ridicule and resistance from the city's top brass, who saw it as a desecration of a local hero's memory. While the bureaucratic wheels turned, Petrova focused on the present-day implications. If a secret society had existed in the 1930s, who were its members now? She started by tracing the genealogies of the other powerful men who appeared as extras in the film's party scene. What she found was a stunning, unbroken line of power. The descendants of these men were not just wealthy. They were the current pillars of the city's establishment. They were the heads of the biggest banks, the senior partners at the most powerful law firms, the owners of the major news outlets, and, most chillingly, they all sat on the board of a single, immensely powerful and deeply private philanthropic organization, the Blackwood Foundation. The Blackwood Foundation, ostensibly a charity dedicated to preserving the city's heritage, was, Petrova now suspected, the modern-day incarnation of the secret society from the film. And its current chairman, a man of immense influence and impeccable public reputation, was a 75-year-old man named Harrison Croft. He was the son of Samuel Croft, the studio head who had been ruined by The Elysian Fields. And he was the older brother of Benjamin Croft, the multiplex owner who had been trying to buy Arthur's Theatre. The puzzle pieces snapped into place with a terrifying click. The story of Samuel Croft being ruined was a lie, a piece of theater designed to cover his tracks. He had likely been a member of the society, and his ruin was his payment for burying the film and silencing the director. The family hadn't been shamed. They had been rewarded for their loyalty. And now, his son, Harrison Croft, was the keeper of the secret. They now had a prime suspect who was not just a man, but the head of a powerful, shadowy organization. Harrison Croft had the motive, the resources, and the generational imperative to protect his family's secret at any cost. The link between Harrison Croft and the murder weapon was the final piece. The sophisticated sonic device was not something one could buy online. It was likely a piece of custom-made military or industrial technology. A search of the Blackwood Foundation's financial records revealed a series of large, vaguely defined payments to a subsidiary of Omnicorp, the tech empire from the previous story. The subsidiary specialized in advanced acoustic engineering and sonic weaponry. The connections were all there, hidden in plain sight behind a wall of corporate and charitable respectability. Corrigan finally got the approval for the exhumation. At a misty, pre-dawn ceremony, a small team gathered at the city's oldest cemetery, at the foot of the towering granite mausoleum of Thomas Blackwood. When the casket was opened, it was, as they had suspected, empty, contained only sandbags, weighted to simulate the feel of a body. Thomas Blackwood had faked his death. The film was telling the truth. Armed with this undeniable proof, they moved on Harrison Croft. They didn't arrest him at his mansion or his office. Petrova suggested a more theatrical location. They requested a meeting at the one place that connected all the threads of the story, the Grand Regent Theater. They met him in the main auditorium, the same room where Arthur Vance had been killed. Harrison Croft was an imposing figure, a man who radiated an aura of old money and untouchable power. He was not accompanied by lawyers. He came alone, confident and composed. "Detectives," he said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. "To what do I owe this rather dramatic invitation?" Corrigan didn't answer. Instead, he gestured to the projection booth. The giant silver screen flickered to life. It was not a movie that played. It was a silent, high-definition digital transfer of the scene from The Elysian Fields, the glamorous party from 1932. The camera panned across the faces of the city's founding fathers, all of them supposed to be dead, all of them alive and well. Harrison Croft watched the silent images, his composure unwavering, but a deep, weary sadness entered his eyes. He watched as the camera zoomed in on the face of Thomas Blackwood, and then on the face of his own father, Samuel Croft, standing beside him, a loyal lieutenant. "My father called it the Great Burden," Harrison said, his voice quiet, as the images faded to black. "A secret he was forced to carry. Those men, they weren't villains in the way you think. They believed the city was a fragile thing, that it needed to be guided with a firm, unseen hand, away from the chaos of politics and public opinion. They faked their deaths to gain a kind of freedom, to operate without scrutiny, for what they believed was the greater good. And they killed to protect that secret," Petrova said, her voice cutting through his nostalgic reverence. "They destroyed Elias Sterling, and you, or someone working for you, killed Arthur Vance." Harrison Croft turned to look at her, a flicker of what might have been admiration in his eyes. Arthur Vance was a foolish, sentimental old man. We had known for years that he possessed the last print. My father had made a deal with him, a gentleman's agreement. Arthur would keep the film safe and silent, and in return, his little theater would be protected, allowed to survive. But Arthur broke that agreement. He explained that his brother, Benjamin, had discovered through his business dealings that Arthur was deeply in debt and was considering selling the film to save his theater. The society could not allow that. The risk of the film being seen was too great. "So you sent someone to retrieve it," Corrigan stated, "and to silence him." "Silence was the primary objective," Harrison admitted, with a chilling lack of emotion. "The retrieval of the film was secondary. The story was the true danger. We sent an associate, a specialist. She was supposed to render him unconscious with the sonic device, take the film and leave. But something went wrong. The device was more powerful than anticipated. His death was an accident, a regrettable, but necessary, consequence of his betrayal. He spoke of murder as a regrettable consequence, a piece of unfortunate collateral damage in the century-long mission of his secret society. He was so insulated by his power and his belief in his own righteousness that he saw nothing wrong with what he had done. His confession, delivered in the very place the crime was committed, was all they needed. As the police came to escort him away, Harrison Croft had one last thing to say. "You can arrest me," he said, looking from Corrigan to Petrova. But you cannot arrest an idea. The foundation will continue. The city will be protected. You have won this small battle, detectives, but you cannot possibly understand the war. In the end, Harrison Croft was arrested, and the story of the Blackwood Foundation became the biggest scandal in the city's history. The film, The Elysian Fields, was finally screened, not as a thriller, but as a historical document, a testament to a secret that had been kept for almost a century. The Grand Regent Theatre, saved by the very secret that had killed its owner, was declared a historical landmark. Months later, Petrova stood in the lobby of the restored theater, looking at a new display case. In it, on a bed of velvet, was the single rusty canister that had started it all. The theater was full of life again, the magic returned. But she knew that the magic of the movies and the secrets of the city were often two sides of the same mysterious reel. Every film is a time capsule, a flicker of light and shadow that captures a moment that is forever gone. But sometimes, as with The Elysian Fields, that captured moment holds a truth so powerful, it can reach across the decades and demand a final, bloody reckoning. The Grand Regent Theatre is safe, but its story is a chilling reminder that the darkest secrets are often hidden in the most public of places, waiting in the dark for the right person to finally turn on the projector. Thank you for joining us for this special presentation. If you believe that the most compelling mysteries are the ones written on the celluloid of the past, be sure to subscribe and ring the bell. We have many more reels to unspool. Now, the house lights are coming up. The show is over.